for Caroni Central.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I take this opportunity to make a few points, to say a few words on an act to amend the Firearms Act, Chapter 1601, which is now before us today. I listened to the member for Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West, and he indicated, as we all know, that this legislation is really to deal with illegal arms. And many of the 28 clauses in the bill are focused on increasing the penalties. And he made the point that amending the firearms legislation is because guns are a problem in Trinidad and Tobago. I think that is generally known. I think we know that we do have this particular problem. The member used some numbers which reinforce the case. And he then went on to talk about the dog whistle. And I won't speak to that because I really want to say that, I mean, that is something in a society like ours we should really try to avoid. I don't think it helps anyone when we create the conditions for that kind of uncertainty and tension, and more than that, the insecurities that it raises. And I don't think it's a wise thing to do for members who lead the country and sit in the parliament. He talked about the fact that 297 people who were killed of the 366 people murdered up to 3 days ago this month were in fact killed with illegal weapons. And he asked the question, what can we do? Because our job, he says, is to pass legislation, and it's up to other authorities to do the rest. But I say to him, in a way, you know, it's like the issue of elections and a democracy. You have elections, let's say, in our system every 5 years. And elections are an essential part of democracy. It is critical to it. But in between the elections, there are so many things you have to do, so many institutions you have to support, so many things need to happen for that democracy to really be working and to be alive, and so on. And so it is with this issue of passing the legislation. Although we pass the legislation, it is important that the government, once the legislation is passed and it is proclaimed, do the things that are necessary with the institutions under its control to make sure that the job is done. So that the point I'm making here is that it's not the legislation alone. The executive does have a role in this matter once the legislation is passed, and he raised the issue of the judiciary, which I'll deal with in a minute. And he said that this legislation was in fact done with consultation with the police service. He said that the purpose of a firearm is to kill someone. I don't quite agree. I mean, people do have legal firearms in order to protect themselves and their property. And they would only kill in an extreme circumstance. So I think it is important to understand, I think he was talking within the notion, or within the framework of the criminal element, that when someone in the criminal community takes up a handgun or any type of gun, that it is really for the purpose of murder. And he also talked about shooters. He mentioned the particular case, which I think this is the second time he's mentioned this particular issue of this person who was a shooter who, I can't remember if he said the shooter was killed or the shooter killed somebody, but he said that that particular shooter had been alleged to have committed 47 killings. And he asked the question, what are we going to do about this? And he used that as a justification for the bill. He said, I want to stand with police officers in this. And he mentioned the 549 illegal firearms seized so far this year. I have no problem with that, except to say that I think we know that part of the problem may very well be with a very small group or perhaps individuals within a police force that by and large enforces the law and tries to do a good job. That there are some people who basically the information is both informal and formal, all right, are sometimes aligned with criminal elements. I don't know what a Glock is. I've heard the word. And he talks about the fact that some of these guns come not from South America, but from North America. And I was glad to hear him say that there are talks with the US to work on a collaborative strategy to deal with illegal guns, because wherever the guns come from, the point is that once they get here, we have a serious problem, because you have all these illegal firearms all over the place. And he talked about the Bahamas. I was surprised in preparing for this to see that Bahamas was one of the countries with the highest numbers of murders, together with Trinidad per capita, I mean, together with Trinidad and Tobago and, of course, Jamaica. And he mentioned that particular issue. And I just want to remind the member for Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West, that when the honorable member for Siparia was Prime Minister of this country, she sought through the United Nations to get the Small Arms Secretariat in Trinidad and Tobago. We did not win. Another country edged us out, and they got the Secretariat. But the whole purpose of that was to deal with this issue of the movement of small arms. And I remember the honorable member, when she was Prime Minister of this country, actually argued the case that many of the guns that come into the country, because we were not producers of guns, come from outside, and that a significant part of that came from North America and elsewhere. So I would ask the government, you know, we are signatories to this matter. We didn't get the Secretariat, it is true, but perhaps we can establish, do our part, so to speak, to make us part of that community with the signatures that are necessary in order to put into place the things that are important to be part of this protection against small arms coming into the country with other countries, so that we can get our side of the bargain fixed. I want to say also that, you know, recently we had the problem in Carly Bay. I'm not going to speak on that issue, but I do want to say that some time ago, when the member for Point Fortin was the Minister of National Security, we had an incident in which a hand grenade was found somewhere on the shores of Carly Bay. And the person who had a bag, nobody knows whether the bag had hand grenades in it or something else, because the bag was never found, was able to get on sea and escape, and nothing happened. Nothing was followed up on that. We don't know what happened. But what we do know, and they may not be connected at all, is that many months later, over a year later, you had a situation in which a pirogue was stormed, a boat was stormed, and a number of people, the fishermen from Cali Bay, actually executed. So that you have a situation in which, you know, a number of things have been happening, and there is no question that there is an escalation, that there is a kind of moving from one situation to an even deeper situation. And there is indeed cause for worry, and that is why we are supporting the legislation. I don't think the government means, they were very mean to my colleague for Naparima. He was expressing his point of view as he is entitled to do as a member of the legislature, speaking his piece on a bill. And he was articulating his position, and as you would expect, in the cut and thrust of the presentation, he would make political statements. But there is nothing wrong with that, and there is no reason to chastise or try to insult the member for Naparima on that count. But I was saying that the thing gets worse, it gets deeper, and there is no question in my mind that we've got to deal with this particular problem now of guns on the street, so to speak. Now, something the minister, the member for Port of Spain, North, Santans West, and remember he is Minister of National Security, something that he said, you know, sort of set me thinking. He was talking about the fact that there have been wrong judicial decisions. That is to say, under sentencing, the fact that the sentences that were met out from the magistracy were not equal to the crime that was committed. He felt that they got away too leniently. And he talked about the fact that you need a parliamentary intervention, a parliamentary nudge, in order to let the judiciary know where basically it should be targeting its sentencing. Some of us, in reading the legislation, would say that perhaps the parliament is telling the judiciary how it should decide in a particular instance. Let's say when somebody has a 3-time conviction for carrying of illegal weapons, that they get this sentence for the rest of their life, for instance. And I am simply going to ask the question. I'm not casting any aspersions, and I'm not making any allegations of this kind. Does the government feel that they need to intervene through Parliament in this way because either members of the judiciary might be scared in a situation, for instance, in which they might be under threat by criminal elements, which is something I think that would be worrisome, and it's not something that we should treat very lightly because it has happened in other countries. And the second thing is the legislation and the fact that we determine by legislation what the sentence should be. Is that the way, is that one way of the government using the legislature to protect the judiciary if perchance it might be, or members might be, under threat? I raise it because these are important considerations for a democratic country, and these are important considerations for crime and criminality, and these are important considerations for the separation of the jurisdiction of legislature on the one hand, judiciary on the other, and the executive, of course, being the third part. Now, this bill is about trafficking in firearms or prohibited weapons. And throughout the bill, there is an increase in penalties. There are about 28 clauses, and I think about half of them have to do with the increase in the penalties for the crimes, whether first crime, second crime, or third crime. Now, so the focus is illegal firearms and weapons and heavier penalties. Now, From my point of view, and certainly on this side, we have no problem with flagging illegal weapons. There are too many killings, Mr. Deputy Speaker, with guns. There are too many illegal guns, and there are too many weapons around, floating freely in the society. We feel that some of these heavier penalties, however, are extreme, like the one that has to do with putting away someone for life, because that really is until you're dead. And the question we have to ask ourselves is whether we want to impose that kind of penalty on anybody for any crime, all right, to rot in jail until you're dead. So we flag that issue and we raise it. But we go along in principle that the second or third conviction for possession of a gun or crime or involvement of a crime involving a weapon warrants a heavier penalty, since such a person is a problem citizen and a threat to personal security and also to peacefulness in the society. Now, I have some numbers here, but I won't quote them again, Mr. Deputy Speaker, because they were used by the members opposite. I think the AG quoted some numbers, and he probably has more accurate figures than I do, because I would have gotten in from some source perhaps earlier than he did. And the Minister of National Security would also have up-to-date figures, so I won't quote it. Suffice it to say that all the data that is available, those articulated here and the ones that I have, tell us that we have a problem with illegal guns in the society and that we have to find a way to clean it up. Now, it is not just Trinidad and Tobago that is a problem, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This is so in the Bahamas, as I just mentioned. It is so in Jamaica, and it is a problem that has to be addressed. Obviously, any government, any parliament, any society, any citizen in the country would like to see guns and other illegal weapons off the street. Any society that is law-abiding and wants to have peace and security would want to see gun-toting criminals, especially repeat offenders, out of the community, and understand that this logic of wanting to keep them away from members of the society who want to go about the business of living is not unreasonable. So in principle, as I said, we support on this side. We supported the bill, amendment bill, although we had reservations on the human rights side, for the same reason, which is that we know crime is a problem. We know the population wants a solution. And therefore, we felt it was important to support that. We know that we need to deal with crime. We need to get criminals off the street and out of the community. And the question in our mind, which is why we hesitate and why we give critical support, is really, are strong laws and heavy penalties really a deterrent? I mean, that really is the fundamental question. And I want to make the following points, which are, first of all, that strong laws are good, but they are not enough. Secondly, harsh penalties may be in order, given the circumstances, but they are not enough. And addressing the issue of possession of an illegal firearm is important. And the AG says it was the first time that we were making this a particular issue in a bill before this House. I believe him. And I want to say that even that is not enough. I have before me here, which I put together, my staff put together, the bills that have been brought to this House related to crime. There are, I won't read them, but there are 38 bills that have been brought to Parliament in this session. 11 have been proclaimed. 9 have been assented to. 9 are at the first reading stage, 3 at the second reading stage, 1 has lapsed, 1 is in the form of a committee report which has not yet been debated, and 3, because they were flawed laws, were defeated. But crime continues, right? The number was given to us by the member for Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West, 366 as up to today. So the murders continue. And we have had a number of bills that deal directly with the issue of trying to curb crime, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Now, 38 bills were introduced, and I outlined how they are divided up. But we had the anti-gang bill, the bail amendment bill, the plea bargaining bill, the trial by judge alone bill, the anti-terrorism amendment bill, the Proceeds of Crime Act, the indictable proceedings, the unexplained wealth, and yet the murder rate is 366 today. So if legislation alone could curb crime, we would be in a better position. Because look how many laws have been brought here. Look how many laws we have passed. And look at these particular laws, 4 and 48, 9 of them that I just called, that are directly targeted to deal with the question of curbing crime and dealing with the murders. And we are still in the same position. So clearly legislation by itself is not enough. That does not mean that we do not need legislation. That does not mean that we do not need laws and strong laws. But legislation by itself is not enough, and I want to impress that on the government because it is important that they take that into account. So legislation alone is not the answer. Why? Because there's the issue of detection rate. I won't go into that. The AG said something about that. My colleague from Naparima said something about that. I won't go into it. But the point is that we have a problem with the detection of crime in the country, and that is a problem that must be addressed and solved. We have a problem with the conviction rate. So it's not just the legislation, because with the legislation, you have to catch them first, and you have to convict them. So the detection rate is an issue. The conviction rate issue is an issue, and the law can only be applied when a crime has been solved and the perpetrator convicted. Not so? That is the situation. Now, on a previous occasion, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Attorney General shared with us that there are 211 known gang leaders in Trinidad and Tobago. And he shared with us that there are approximately 2,500 known gang members in Trinidad and Tobago. I would suspect that many of the illegal guns on the street are owned, possessed, or under the control of these 2,711 people who themselves are known perpetrators of crime, even if some of them have not been convicted. Okay? And I'm going by the numbers that have been shared with us in this House. Now, if these are known facts, that we have 211 gang leaders, that we have 2,500 people who belong to gangs, if these facts are known to the government, known to the police and the forces of law enforcement, should the issue of 211 existing functioning gang leaders not be addressed, Mr. Deputy Speaker? I mean, I take that as a common sense question to the population that might be listening here. Would it not be reasonable to say that if you have 211 gang leaders known to the authorities at different levels in this society, in the structure of power within the society, and then law enforcement, wouldn't it make sense to deal with these 211? And I ask the question, can 211 people not be managed and contained and caught in the gangland in the gangland or criminal activities that they conduct. It is a reasonable question to ask if it's 211 of them. And you know who they are, where they are, the demographics of it, you know the geography of it. It is possible to, know the movement, the logistical arrangements that are involved. I mean, isn't there something that can be done? What about the 2,500 gang members, Mr. Deputy Speaker? Can the issue of 2,500 known gang functionaries not be addressed? 2,500 people constitute a fairly large number. Yep. That is true. But there must be some calculated, strategic set of initiatives that can be put together to address such a known fact, which can then be deployed for results. I wonder, Mr. Deputy Speaker, how many of the 211 identified gang leaders are in jail and how many are free? That is an important question. How many of the 2,500 gang members are in prison and how many are free? Does knowing these facts, for instance, how many are imprisoned, how many are free, which I am sure the Minister of National Security knows or can get the breakdown of if he asks for it, does knowing these facts make a difference in the way we should approach these matters? And I think they should. The government often talks about evidence-based policy. They talk about statistics as being important for action. These basic statistics that we have here of how many gang leaders, how many gang members, who in jail, who not in jail, aren't those things critical for solving the problem? What I am saying, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is that if you zero in on the 211 fiercest known gang leaders and the 2,500 or so known gangsters, rather than have a diffuse reactive strategy that is not well managed, I say not well managed because the murders continue, chances are that you might be able to make life safer for the 1.4 million of us who live in this country and try to live a peaceful life. Don't you think, Mr. Deputy Speaker? I mean, however smart, however mobile, however ubiquitous 211 people might be, it is still a small number in proportion. And 2,500 is larger, but it is still proportionately small, even though we are a small country of 1.4 million. I mean, what is happening to surveillance which can be lawfully done? And I mentioned lawfully done. What is happening to intelligence? What acts on the intelligence on criminals, crime, and criminal behavior? Who acts on these? Who investigates? Is it effective? Is it anticipatory enough as it is supposed to be? Is it preventative? Is it preemptive? Is that not what intelligence gathering is for? Why is intelligence not leading to a higher detection rate? Why is intelligence not being converted into evidence fast enough? How many more laws do we need to charge known criminals for crime? And why is the conviction rate so weak? Who builds a good case? Who prosecutes on the evidence? Why does it fall apart? Do not these harsh penalties, Mr. Deputy Speaker, depend on intelligence? Do they not depend on investigation, on evidence, effective law enforcement, detection, charging somebody, building a case, prosecuting the case, securing a conviction. Isn't that what the intelligence is for? Are these necessary steps which precede sentencing, are these necessary steps which precede sentencing being effectively addressed?
Honorable Member?
Yeah.
Your initial speaking time has elapsed. You have an additional 15 minutes. Do you care to avail yourself?
I would like to, yes.
Proceed.
Many shots are called in prison, Mr. Deputy Speaker. That's why I said, you know, criminals are both inside and outside. Are we dealing with that particular issue? Some argue that elements of the prison service are compromised. Is that true? And can it be dealt with? Some argue that elements, a small number of them, of the police service are compromised. Is that true? And can it be dealt with? Some argue that the political directorate, some elements might be compromised. Is that true? And can it be dealt with? If there is complicity in any of these three areas, the prison, the police, the political directorate, and I have no doubt that in each of these three instances it would have to be extremely small, but if there is any complicity, is it identifiable and manageable, Mr. Deputy Speaker? And if it is manageable, does the will exist? Will it be managed? Is the system that supports criminal conduct and criminal activity going to be addressed? And if so, how? And if so, when? Mr. Deputy Speaker, you cannot have effective law in a dysfunctional system. A dysfunctional system has to be fixed before the law can be effectively applied. Beyond the law, there is the issue of justice, too. 4 years have passed. The remand yard has not gotten any better, Mr. Deputy Speaker. A prisoner can rot in the remand yard before his case is heard. The remand yard jail time can exceed the penalty time if he's found guilty. If he is innocent, excessive unearned jail time is a high price to pay. The delays in the court system is the cause of the problem. 4 years, no progress on clogging the courts. Justice delayed, we say, is justice denied. Isn't that what we say? The dysfunctional court system now mired in controversy after controversy, and the less than happy judiciary is continuing as part of the problem in the country. And this severely undermines the process and system of justice, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Even in civil cases, you can die before your case gets heard. And when you have a criminal case with lawyers not appearing, prosecution not ready, delays and postponements of one kind or another, the justice system is dysfunctional and prone to justice denied. It may well be true that the bail system itself promotes criminality and crime, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And this must be known to everyone in the justice system, but nothing is done. When a criminal type secures a bailer, where does he eventually get the money to settle the bailer? And I don't want to get into who is a professional bailer in these types of cases. Why do we perpetrate such a system when we know that what the consequences are and will be? But we passed the no bail bill, so maybe in certain instances this matter will have been taken care of. So how do we manage the guns? I want to say that the guns that we are talking about in this law are the guns on the land right here in Trinidad and Tobago already. They are not the ones coming from outside. And I want to say that if you want to deal with that, you have to see customs and excise and immigration as your border security. And you have to empower them, and you have to make sure that you have the honest officers and systems and the systems of scrutiny to allow them to play that role. Do you know that while there are inlets and unmanned coves all over the country, because we are an island and we have the coast, most of the guns that come out come through customs and excise. They come through what is supposed to be the legal process. Okay, so, and what about immigration? How do the criminals get in here to do their business, to conduct their meetings, and to organize their business? And we are going to we have to have what you might call these joint forces working together, the police, the army, the Coast Guard, the customs, the immigration. We have them in Cedros, we have them in Chagaramas, but how effectively do they work, Mr. Deputy Speaker? And if they don't work, then we have to find a way to make them work, these joint endeavors where the various forces allow us to do something. And why are they not working? Is there some kind of interference? Including possibly, I'm asking, I'm not accusing anybody of anything, political interference in the process. Because it's a legitimate issue to ask in a democracy and in a situation in which, in spite of all the laws that we've passed, we don't seem to be getting anywhere. And I want to ask the question, are we doing the right thing with customs and excise when we are trying to join it with BIR in a system which will make it a revenue collection agency rather than a force that can deal with the protection of your borders? And we have to think through these things carefully. Sometimes the decision you make one way costs you another way. And you have to think about a country. You can't just think about the income. So I just flagged that. This is not the time for that kind of debate. But I want to say that if that is not part of your border security and your control, and you don't have joint endeavors on the security, as you try to have in Cedros and Chagaramas, but not working the way that it's supposed to, and we should have many more all over the country, then we have a problem. And I don't understand. I mean, this is just an aside, but I saw we sent 100 soldiers to the Bahamas, and I want to express my sympathy for their situation. And I really, really support the need for Trinidad and Tobago to help. I remember former Prime Minister Christie saying at a meeting that I was at that if the seawater level in the Bahamas were to rise by 1 foot, 2/3 of the Bahamas would be underwater. And that shows you what climate change and sea level rise and so on, not to mention the storm, which must be part of that whole scenario in the way that it just laid on top of the islands. That what is happening. But I want to ask this. We have 12 boats in the Coast Guard. The Bahamas is 700 islands. 30 of those islands are inhabited by people. They have populations on them. I would have thought that the natural thing to do was for the Coast Guard to go up to the Bahamas and to play. Those boats came from China, and they came from wherever they came through across the place. They traveled the open seas, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And there is no excuse. I'm asking the question. If you're going to navigate 30 islands of human population, which so many people have probably perished, and some are probably wounded and just lying there begging for help, don't you think that the boats would be important of this? So I would say that we need some type of joint border control, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I want to ask them to rethink the bringing together of BIR and customs in that way to make it a revenue-generating agency, and to think about the issue of national security more. And they can always find a formula to get the money from taxes or whatever it is that they want to do. I think you have to spend a lot more time and thought on these issues. Why don't we establish a maximum security remand yard and put the courts in there so that we can deal with some of the things, the solution to some of the problems right there rather than moving prisoners up and down? We are in opposition now, and we are we were in government, it is true. But whether or not we did it, that is not the point. You are in government now, it can be done. So we have a lot of ideas. We always bright. Why don't...
Hold on 1 second.
Yeah.
Okay, again, members, I've given you all a little leeway. Again, please, crosstalk across the chamber, and member for Caroni Central, please address the chair.
Yes. Mr. Deputy Speaker, you know I've been doing that. I just got distracted for a minute. The office of the DPP also, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is a critical area. I know that the AG mentioned some time ago that they were doing something with that. I hope that that is proceeding apace. If we got that, I think it would make a big difference. The Forensic Science Center, that's I don't have enough time to go into that, but all I would say is that there's a technology deficit, there's a knowledge deficit, there's a capacity deficit, and a management deficit. And these things need to be resolved. All right? So, how many minutes do I have again? Huh? 4 more minutes. Thank you, friend. I want to raise just two other issues, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I'll raise them quickly. I had hoped to spend a couple of minutes on them, but I'll raise them quickly. One is the issue of legal guns and the way of giving out or dispensing legal ownership of guns. So I would say, Mr. Deputy Speaker, together with something that deals with illegal firearms in the country, I think there has to be a lot of clarity, transparency, openness, and precision on the issue of the issuance of legal guns to people in the society. I feel it is very important to make that very clear distinction between legal and illegal firearms, and to have it very clearly indicated to the country how and when and why and wherefore, etc., you get to legal guns in the country, and you make that, you dispense that to people who deserve to have them in the society because of the things that they do, the way they conduct their business, etc. The second thing, the final thing I want to raise is the issue of the school system, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And the school system, as we know, is a feeder to criminal activity in some instances. In some instances. Okay? Yes. And it is a feeder in this sense, which is that when you have a situation in which somebody, I'm just dealing with one individual now, somebody drops out of the system, the secondary school system, or somebody does not pass their CXC thing, the question then arises, what does that person do? The person then becomes poor fellow at that age, because what you're dealing with, you're dealing 15, 16 or whatever. He becomes an easy target to basically be recruited by gangs. So I feel that part of the solution to this problem must be a comprehensive solution which targets the school system as a system, and which identifies school by school what kinds of specific interventions need to be made in order to arrest this tide.
Remember, you have 2 more minutes.
Huh? Okay, that can arrest this tide of the potential for dysfunctionality. I think that would be a very good thing in the society, for instance. You know, I went to your constituency the other day, Laventille West, and I saw that NESC has an institution there. And when I asked the guys about it, they told me, look, that place is never open, you know, because people can't come here from all over because they can't cross the boundaries. So you see, you have a problem. You have the school there, but you have a problem of dysfunctionality because it cannot work, because you cannot even cross the boundaries to go to the institution that would give you a skill. So I believe this issue of school and managing the school and basically bringing parents and teachers and community people together in order to save the children in the school, that is a critical factor in dealing with the long-term issue of crime. In order to give these young people the opportunity to build a life, to get a decent education or a skill, and to be able to engage the economic and financial system in a reasonable way. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I thank you for your patience, and I'm very happy to have had the opportunity to contribute.